It's time to talk conspiracy. It's time to talk American history. It's time to talk about the JFK files that were released. And for that, we are turning to Dr. Jonathan Earle from LSU's Ogden Honors College. Good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Brian. How are you doing?
I am doing very well this morning, playing in with some John Williams music from the Oliver Stone movie JFK.
It's a good soundtrack.
The drum lines are fantastic. In fact, I would be willing to bet that Aaron Sorkin, when he was looking at the intro for West Wing, said, "Go back and do that again."
Oh my gosh, yeah. It makes me think of Washington. But go ahead.
All right. So, what have we learned?
Great question. So, I mean, what happened last week, just to catch everybody up, is that President Trump released another 64 or so thousand pages of documents from the National Archives and other sources on the JFK assassination. This is mandated by a law that was passed in 1992, so almost 40 years ago by Congress, in the wake of JFK, the film, by the way, that all of the documents will be released by 2017. Once again, the government did not meet their own deadline, and President Trump said, let's get the rest of these things out there. So we asked, what did we learn? I'm afraid I haven't learned very much. I've been reading these things all weekend. What I have learned has been less about what happened in Dallas in 1963 and more about how the CIA conducted all sorts of operations in the 50s and 60s around the Cold War, around Cuba, around Fidel Castro.
Okay, so this kind of walks us up to when you get into the JFK movie, the Oliver Stone movie. Those two things, they definitely dovetail, to be sure.
Of course.
Now, it like you said, it's probably going to take a lot more digging, but are we walking up towards that being a real possibility here?
I think a lot of people want that to be the case. I'm a skeptic. I'm a doubter because I think nothing I've seen in the 2017 document dump or this tells me anything more about Lee Oswald or about the assassination plot, et cetera. It does show that we were pretty hellbent. The CIA was pretty hellbent on taking out Cuban leader Fidel Castro by any means necessary through a political assassination, using even mafia hitmen and spying on the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, all sorts of things like this. Targeted assassinations were part of the CIA's policy in the 1950s and 60s.
How much of that comes back home to Louisiana?
Oh my God, that's a great question. And you and I have been joking offline about how there are places in Louisiana that are the center of the conspiracy universe.
Oh yeah.
Because of course Lee Harvey Oswald lived on Camp Street in New Orleans, to the day he died. He, got the gun sent to him there, mail order. He passed out leaflets all over downtown New Orleans and in the French Quarter to liberate Cuba and to protect Cuba from American interests. So New Orleans is just awash in all of these things. Now, in the movie, District Attorney Jim Garrison, brought charges against a New Orleans guy, Clay Shaw, and it really amounted to nothing. The jury took, I think, less than an hour to free him after the charges. But it's really one of the places where you have to go if you're a JFK assassinologist.
Yes. Yeah. And so I grew up on the North Shore. I grew up in the Covington, Mandeville area. And growing up, we heard stories all the time about the training camps that were along Lake Pontchartrain, specifically behind Sal and Judy's in Lacombe, off of 190 in Lacombe. You got Sal and Judy's, which was always rumored to be a little bit mobbed up in and of itself.
Right.
So, like, all the conspiracies bubbled up through the oral legend that was, right? I mean, stories are told from generation to generation. This was my upbringing.
I love that. I've got to visit that. I've got to visit that place. So, but again, what were they training to do? It was not to kill the president, from what I can tell from all the documents. It was to do something against Fidel Castro, right? So that's really what was up here. And I do think, the reason why these things weren't completely unredacted, in Trump's first term, were because the CIA really did want to cover its own rear end in a lot of ways. A lot of these tactics they're using are both kind of questionable in terms of legality or morality, and also they don't want to share their spycraft. They don't want to share how to tap a phone in Mexico City in 1961. It's kind of, it makes them look bad.
We're talking with Dr. Jonathan Earle from LSU's Honors College. We're talking about the JFK files that have been released. The president of the United States was interviewed recently, and he says he believes it was Oswald and Oswald alone. Um, what has been your belief on the assassination up until the files have been released?
Great question. I mean, I think I have to agree. I mean, I don't always agree with the president, but I agree with him here because it's just so much of the preponderance of evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy back in 1963, and that there was no one else who was involved that day. That's not to say that there aren't lots of loose ends, and that's where people like Oliver Stone come into the picture. You can always, pull on a thread and say, wait, how did someone get 4 shots off on this kind of gun, inside of 6 seconds? And, and it turns out you can, not everyone can, and you got to be kind of lucky. But it just makes it, so in other words, you can always find something that doesn't make sense, but it doesn't overwhelm the evidence that's already there, in my opinion.
Okay. Then that walks us up to, I don't know if you'd call it a want, but the opening in our minds that allows for conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And what, if you'll pardon the pun, what triggers that?
Such a good question. Okay. I have a theory. And again, it's just a theory. I'm just a professor. But I think we don't like it when stories are not neat and end in a normal, clean way. Mm-hmm. And boy, oh boy, does the JFK assassination disrupt that feeling of comfort. It's so chaotic and horrible and tragic and awful. So we kind of try to have other answers. We look for other answers. And then I'll also say, this is where you and I agree, Brian, like I find conspiracy theories pretty entertaining. Mm-hmm. I enjoy conspiracy thrillers. I read books. I watch movies like 3 Days of the Condor and Parallax View. They're super entertaining to think that designing people are really at the root of all the things that go wrong in the world. But there's so much chaos. There's so much that we don't control, and it leads us to think in this conspiratorial way, I think.
Well, and that's why this is one in particular that I just can't close the book on. In that there's so many different conspiracy theories out there on so many different, every event that happens in this world, you're going to hear conspiracy theory behind it. But this one has so many different open ends and so many different possibilities contributing on the front end that I don't know that you can close all the doors. So even with all the files that are out there, I well, let me ask you, because I don't think they're going to, do you think this conspiracy theories go away here?
I do not. I think that genie's out of the bottle. I think there are too many people who are invested. The internet, we haven't talked about our friend the internet, has made such a huge difference in conspiracy thinking. In 1964, when JFK conspiracy thinking began, it was a couple of guys in their basements, mostly on the political left, by the way, who were working on this stuff with their mimeograph machines. But now it's every single person every citizen of the world can kind of do their own research and try to figure out, if there was another shooter on the grassy knoll.
And to try and recreate history 50 plus years later. I mean, that's
exactly. It's not easy.
No, it's not. Well, it's not easy to be accurate with it. You can come up with whatever you want to.
That's true. And again, and that's another thing. There's so much out there that you can come up with a plausible storyline, even if it's based on things that we know are not true.
So let's go back to New Orleans. Let's go back to Lee Harvey Oswald, David Ferrie, all of the stories that go through New Orleans. There is a lot of buildup on the front. I mean, you can even bring in Dr. Alton Ochsner if you want to, but there's a lot of stories on the front end that have a lot of smoke there, but there's nothing necessarily transferring it over to fire.
I completely agree with that. And my colleague in the LSU history department, Alicia Long, has a terrific book about the Garrison prosecution of Clay Shaw, and how kind of it involves the kind of underground closeted gay world in the French Quarter and the mafia and conspiracies and all sorts, and Cuba. It's really a fascinating read.
That's touched on in the movie as well. I mean, that's a big part of the David Ferrie connection right there.
That's exactly right. And again, Oliver Stone is we opened this interview talking about this. Oliver Stone is a great filmmaker and a great storyteller. I don't think he's a great historian. That's
fair. That's fair, but causing the disconnect or allowing us to disconnect from the storytelling to the actual history is another thing altogether. And the fact that here we are in 2025 and we still don't know all the facts. It's like if there's nothing to not be transparent about, then why aren't we transparent? The CIA stuff is definitely a part of this, to be sure, a huge part of this, but it allows us to not, it allows us to not extinguish the fire.
No, exactly, and that's why I think, and like I think I agree with you that the fire will not be extinguished, at least on this one. There's there's a lot of other conspiracy theories from this era. There's the, did we really land a man on the moon and bring him back to Earth? That's a big
Right.
one. There, all those weather balloons that are shot down over New Mexico in the 1940s and 50s that no one would actually just come out and say they're weather balloons that the United States is using to spy on the Cubans and on the Soviets, but they, it allowed this idea that there was an alien spacecraft that was shot down, and there were maybe an alien autopsy going on in Roswell, New Mexico. It really does get kind of crazy when there really is a real world explanation for a lot of it.
Okay, so let's talk about. We're going to run long, John. I'm letting you know that right now. Okay, let's. Sorry, John, my producer, John. I wasn't getting that comfortable just yet. We're talking with Dr. Jonathan Earle about the JFK assassination. Let's talk about what it would take to close the book on some of these things, because when you have that many coincidences all at once, for example, the number of people who died mysteriously after the Warren report comes out and after the in the wake of that,
that's a good one.
You can't have that large of a number of people end up mysteriously dead when, and I know my audience has heard me say this so many times. Inside Carlos Marcello's office was a sign that said 3 people can keep a secret when 2 are dead. Well, a lot more than 2 ended up dead with this one.
Okay, what is the normal statistic of people who would end up dead that were on the Warren Commission report? I mean, that I don't actually know, but I'm just kind of throwing that out there as the counter argument. And I grew up. My dad was a partner in a law firm that was called Patton, Boggs and Blow, and that was Hale Boggs' son, Tommy Boggs, another New Orleanian, was in the firm. His dad, Hale Boggs, the majority leader. I remember when I was a kid, his plane went down in Alaska, and they never found the plane. And I always thought this was a great smoking gun for how this is an assassination. It turns out that, like, very few planes that go down, small planes that go down in Alaska, are found because it's so huge.
Right.
So even my teenage brain was like, wow, conspiracy. And then I learned later that, like, no, probably not. I mean, it would be great if they found that plane.
Well, yeah. I mean, but with the amount of time removed since then, it's, the questions are never going to go away. With the reports that are out there, I want to conclude with this. What's still missing? What do we still not know?
And here I'm going to actually quote Oliver Stone. We really don't know the why. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't leave a note saying, I'm going to kill President Kennedy, or I'm going to try to kill President Kennedy because X. It kind of, we can conjecture that it has something to do with Cuba. Oliver Stone made it all about that President Kennedy wanted to withdraw American troops from Vietnam. That's just not really the President Kennedy that historians understand. He did give one speech in the summer of 1963 that suggested that he might be rethinking strategy in Vietnam, but there's no way that the Cold Warrior John F. Kennedy was anti-war in 1963. If that makes any sense. So I think learning kind of motive and why, the reason we read mystery novels would really make me happy and would help end this, but we're never going to know that.
See, even within that answer, you said Lee Harvey Oswald did not leave a letter saying I killed John F. Kennedy because X. And of course, X, who was played by Donald Sutherland, said that. No, I'm just kidding.
I love that. That's my favorite scene in the whole movie. If anyone listening to this has not seen JFK, there's a great scene with Donald Sutherland talking to Jim Garrison, played by Kevin Costner, on a bench near the Lincoln Memorial. It's just chilling and great.
Will there be any way to spell out all those events that he talked about, all those coincidences that piled in at once?
No. In a word, I don't think so. We can talk about it over drinks, though.
Absolutely. And that's where this should be had. That's where this stuff is fun, because it's a mental exercise every time.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you're talking about it.
Same. He is Dr. Jonathan Earle from LSU's Honors College. He's Dean Professor over at LSU. I appreciate you so much for hopping on board to have some fun for a couple minutes.
That was great. Talk to you later.